Lucy, to you first, then you would tear up this new system and start targeting just the very poorest families, is that right?
Well, not just the very poorest, but I think what we've got to have with the early years is some really clear policy objectives. And I think what your film showed there is that the myriad of schemes that we have are kind of failing many policy objectives at the same time. So there are two reasons why the state should invest in early years and childcare. One is to support working families go back to work, particularly to try and boost maternal employment rates. And the second is for social mobility reasons, to close and narrow that developmental and educational gap that exists already by the age of 5.
So why then wouldn't you want it to go as widely as you could? Because both those reasons apply to nearly all families, right?
Yes, well, they can do, but what we're seeing under this government is that the skewing of that money now very much focused on working families, and in fact better off working families, not even lower income working families. A report I published yesterday with the Social Market Foundation, the analysis in that, we found that of the new money that the government is going to be spending over the course of this Parliament on the early years, 75% of that £9 billion is going on the top half of earners, and the most disadvantaged families will see less than 3% of that money. And I just don't think you can justify that.
Let's put that to David. It is hard to argue against focusing on the very poorest in society, isn't it?
Well, there will be very many disappointed mums and dads if the scheme that's being rolled out were to be scrapped now, including me. But when the childcare for lower income families was first introduced in 2013, the government gave a commitment that when it could afford to, it would expand that scheme so many more families, including higher income working families, would be able to access it for exactly the reasons outlined in your introduction. It's amongst the most expensive childcare in the world. So the new money that's come forward is the fulfilment of a promise when childcare was introduced free for lower income families, that in due course it would also be made available to others as well.
So you're now as an ethos, the party of working parents, of working mums?
Well, councils are involved at the front line of making sure that children get the best possible start in life. We know that the money that you spend on early years...
Let's go back to that question, though, because that's always been a sort of a difference, hasn't it, between Labour and the Conservatives. Conservatives were never scared to say, actually, we think, you know, parents that stay at home might be raising their children best. You've even said mums that stay at home are raising their children best. Has that now gone from your philosophy?
Well, I can't speak for what the government is thinking about this, but I can certainly say from a Conservative Council's perspective, we see the benefits to our local economy of making sure that good quality childcare is available. There's lots of research over many years that shows the impact that that has. And I think whether we're looking at it philosophically or politically, it is the right thing to do to make sure that that's available to as many people as possible.
David's point there is that there will be a lot of middle-class families, and let's be honest, this would disproportionately hit, I think, working women who would say, well, I can't afford to go out anymore to work.
Well, I think you've got to try and do both, but I think the government is now almost entirely focusing on the better off working families. And look, I mean, my eldest child is about to start school in September, so I've had 7 or 8 years of spending a huge amount of money on nursery fees, so I'm well aware of those costs. But we've really got to do something.
Can I just ask, Lucy,
Yeah.
do you think you shouldn't have been receiving any of that free childcare? Do you think that was, I mean, you know, your own circumstances, you know, you work hard as an MP, you wouldn't have been able to do half of that, would you, if you had children at home that you couldn't afford to send out? Or I don't know what your circumstances are.
Well, I mean, I got relatively little help, really, from the state. And actually, yes, it's very difficult for families to manage those costs, but it didn't affect whether I was at work or not. And that is one of the sort of policy objectives that I think we've got to look at here.
But it's
and
about whether it rewards work, isn't it, fundamentally? Do you want to say, we're going to help you and we're going to help more families to have 2 parents that can go out to work, or is that not important?
Well, it is important, but it shouldn't be the only policy objective, and I fear that over the coming years that is now becoming the principal policy objective. When we look at the developmental gaps at the age of 5, they are stark. Over half of children from disadvantaged families are not at the expected level when they start school. The single biggest indicator of how well you will do at your GCSEs is still your attainment at the age of 5. Children from more affluent families will have heard 30 million more words by the age of 3 than those from disadvantaged families. So we can't afford not to do something about it.
Let me just put that to David. Would you agree then that the earlier children have any kind of schooling, any kind of interactive nursery, the better off they will be? Because, you know, you could say as Conservatives, we will give you the money, you can spend it on nursery care if you want, or on children's shoes and clothes if you prefer. I mean, that was the sort of the old style Tory policy, wasn't it? Are you now saying, yes, every child should get into education, in whatever sense that is, as early as possible?
Well, we believe every child deserves the best possible start in life, and the early years foundation stage curriculum, which is run...
That's a slightly different question, though, because the best start in life could be whatever the parent thinks is the best start for them, right?
Well,
now, you're pushing them down the line.
The research on this point is very, very clear. It shows that good early education is a fantastic indicator. If you get that right, children do better at primary school, they do better at secondary school, they go on to university, they go on to college. So we know that the money that's spent in this way is the most effective use of that money, and that's why the government is committed to this. It's why councils are supporting us. Now, we do have some issues with some of the small print of the policy. It's clear that it can be too complex, and many nursery providers quite validly have concerns. But the early years foundation stage curriculum, the access that offers, the balance that that brings to those children's start in life, is undoubtedly the best possible way to spend the money.
We're out of time. Thank you both very much indeed. Thanks for joining us.